Hello and welcome back to Travel Market Life Live, Hospitality Discussions, and this is the third instalment that was recorded on September the 4th with a room full of hoteliers and experts looking at some pertinent issues. In this episode, we're looking at staffing and leadership, with Camilla Woods, Head of Services Hospitality Action, and Esmat Faiz, Associate Solicitor at Irwin Mitchell. We'll be looking at the changing employment regulations on the horizon and the importance of mental health in the hospitality sector. Now, the industry turnover rate is at 42% within 90 days, and 46% of hospitality workers are on the national minimum wage, with more than 80% of hospitality operators facing recruitment and retention challenges, with just 33% implementing clear people strategies in their organisations. Yet, 83% aim to improve operational complexity using digital tools. We're going to hear from our two experts, and then we're going to hear a summary of the conversations between hoteliers as they look at how they're tackling the struggle of recruitment and retention, what the staff challenges are at their properties, and how they're balancing guest experiences and expectations with operations.
Welcome to Travel Market Life, your companion for industry insights and professional business development. Travel Market Life. Join us by webcast, video or podcast.
First, we spoke to Camilla Woods and asked her, what is Hospitality Action?
Thanks very much, Ryan. Hospitality Action is the industry charity for hospitality. So we support anyone who works in food, drink and accommodation service, whether they're working currently in the industry or have up to 7 years service in the industry. And we have been around since 1837, so almost 200 years of heritage supporting people.
That's incredible, really.
Yes.
Yes. So, obviously the hospitality industry is thousands of years old, but
absolutely.
To have an organisation that's been running here in the UK that long is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I spoke to a couple of your colleagues in a previous podcast, so anybody can check that out, where we dive into the services and the wider support that Hospitality Action provides, as well as the Walk for Wellbeing events that you host. Yeah. But we're here to talk about something much more poignant within the operations of hotel management. It's the people and mental health, because that's really at the forefront of many people's minds when it comes to employment, well-being, but also what we as an industry and any business really are having to deal with today. What are the key things that we need to be considerate of when it comes to our industry and mental health?
Yes, thanks, Ron. I think, just to kind of rope back a little bit, one of the things that we've done recently is we take an industry-wide survey called Taking the Temperature, and we gather data on the mental health issues and challenges in the workplace. And I think from our recent results, and I'm very happy to send out a copy of the survey to everyone, we found that work-life balance is one of the biggest issues, followed by concerns about mental health and really people worried about their finances as well. So there's a whole kind of plethora of issues, both personal and professional, that put a lot of pressure on individuals, and then in turn your managers and you as a business in terms of kind of people, absent from the workplace, perhaps not fully concentrating on the role in hand because, they're worried about things like that. So I think for us, we put in a lot of programs and support and training to try and build that kind of resilience into the workplace culture and focus on some of those issues from the data that we have.
I followed up by asking if there are any particular issues that affect staff in hospitality more than other sectors.
Yeah, I think, it's the hours. Obviously, long hours is part of our culture. And I think to your point earlier about maybe that kind of flex around number of days in. So, again, from our results, we were looking at long hours, work-life balance, and again, sort of expectations and pressure in the workplace. And we've seen that kind of increase as there have been staff shortages. So there's more pressure on the team that are in work. So again, you can't get into this kind of, I suppose, perfect storm of a situation where there's a lot of pressure in the workplace because of the lack of, perhaps people in a department or a team as well.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So hopefully we'll discuss that in more detail with the hoteliers and find out where they're facing things. Anything further for us to be thinking about when it comes to mental health and supporting our staff?
Yeah, I think training is really important. So, if you have or you're considering mental health first aid training, I think that's a really good place to start so that you have a number of champions within your organisation and you're starting to kind of shift that culture a bit where people are perhaps able to open up and have that conversation. But I think what's also really important there is that you then have a structure in place to support those managers, those mental health first aiders. Because again, as I say, the accidental counsellor role is a kind of risk. And sometimes people can feel that they don't quite know what to do with that information that's been shared, or it might have triggered something in their past as well. So I think mental health first aid training is really important, but put in the infrastructure around it to support the managers. And again, I think, and if you have an employee assistance program as well, work really closely with your provider to look at kind of utilisation, engagement, the types of issues, the types of support, because it's very easy to sign up to one of the programs, but then not really drive utilisation within the organisation. And we find sometimes people just aren't aware of all the support that is there for them. So yeah, they'd be my two main things.
Camilla, thank you very much indeed. That's wonderful. Next, I spoke to Esmat Faiz, Associate Solicitor at Irwin Mitchell, about the 6 changes to employment law on the horizon that will affect the hospitality sector.
I think obviously we've got the new government and they're very keen on the overhaul of workers' rights. And so there are quite a few things. There's one that was already in the pipeline, which I expect your listeners are all well aware about, which is tipping. So from the 1st of October 2024, tips which are under the business's control. So that's only tips that actually come to the employer in some way. They have to be shared fairly between workers. And there's a statutory code of practice on that. So it's about what you need to do in relation to that. So making sure you've got your policy, keeping records of all those tips that are coming in. You need to work out how you're going to divide them up. And you will need to consult with your employees on how you do that, and making sure you're keeping those records to show how you've done that.
So you've got to consult your employees to know how you're going to divvy up the tips.
Yes, yeah. So there's nothing set out in the code that says how you have to do it. It's really up to the individual business.
Ooh.
Because it may depend, you might think front of house get more and, the other employees get less, but it depends on the business really, what's considered to be fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So we've got tipping on the horizon.
Yeah. There's also the national living wage. So, of course, in April, it went up quite significantly in April. And then it also, the threshold for getting that higher rate, so the actual national living wage went down to 21 from 23, age 21 to 23. So the government have committed to reducing that age again. So it's going to be everyone from the age of 18 upwards. And they have recommended to the Low Pay Commission that they take into account the cost of living.
Mm-hmm.
So previously, the Low Pay Commission sets what the national minimum wage is going to be. And they used to just look at the kind of mean and median salaries. But now they're also going to be looking at cost of living. Unfair dismissal, that's going to become a day one right. So whereas now you have to have worked for 2 years to be able to claim unfair dismissal, it's going to be that from the start of employment, you're protected. Now, we don't know the exact rules yet because they're still going to be announced. They're going to be announced quite soon, we expect. They have said that you will still be able to have a probationary period. So that's going to become really important, making sure you've got that 3-6 month probationary period whereby you can test out whether a new employee is suitable. And another one I think that might be quite important is 0 hours contracts.
That is a really interesting one because this came in during the last Labour government, I think, when the early noughties, wasn't it? Which was an interesting move on their behalf. And now they're looking to bring that to an end.
It doesn't sound like it's going to be a total ban. They're going to ban exploitative 0 hours contracts. So I think what they're particularly looking at is a situation where the employee is meant to be available at all times, has no control over what hours they're going to get from week to week. And rather, because of course there's some people who like 0 hours contracts. It works very well for them as an employee, as a worker. They may have other commitments. They may be studying, for example, and they just want to pick up shifts as and when. So it sounds as though those are still going to be possible, but it's just going to be the situation where an employee is sat at home waiting, and 1 week they get no work. Next week they might get some, but they've got no control over that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't, as yet, I'm afraid, have any more details I can give you about how it's going to work, the ban, how anything will be calculated. So the right to request flexible working, that's now a day one right. So an employee can start the job and ask for flexible working. We're also looking at it being that they are able to put in more than one request a year, so 2 requests. The time period's being reduced, so they've got to be considered within 2 months, including any appeal. It hasn't changed the fact that you can still turn down a request. So if it doesn't work for the business, there's a set list of reasons you can give. So the lack of work at the time the employee wants to work, if it's going to put too much pressure on other people. Those are just a few. There's various list of reasons you can turn down a request.
I guess it sounds to me like there needs to be a really strong framework for HR and employment management within hotels. They need to make sure there's checking to see where each and every employee is in regards to all and every single one of these developments that are going to be happening, and make sure you've got clear policies, I guess, that the employees really understand where they stand.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's really important. Just checking your policies are up to date. And there's the final one that I think is going to be a really important one, because I think this is quite a big issue sometimes in this sector, is sexual harassment. So the duty on employers to take reasonable steps to protect their staff from sexual harassment. So I expect you've all heard a lot about this already. This is coming in quite soon. Originally, it had been that it was going to include protecting staff from harassment by third parties. That's not now happening. It's just about people that the employer has under their control.
Employees,
workers, potentially agency workers, contractors, potentially. It might depend. And so what it means is that if somebody brings a claim and they're successful, if you haven't taken reasonable steps to prevent that, then the compensation could be uplifted by 25%. And compensation can be fairly high. There's a real range up to kind of 50,000 is not uncommon in certain situations. So a 25% uplift on that is quite high, and there is no cap. So although it tends to be within that range, there is actually no cap. So the things we'd suggest that people do is ensuring that you've got staff-wide anti-harassment policies and making sure that staff know about them, they've read them, they've kind of digested them. So rather than it just being, oh, look, we've got this policy, it's somewhere hidden away in a staff handbook, nobody's actually read it, that wouldn't be a reasonable step. But making sure everyone's read it, making sure they understand it, regular training for staff. So, it's very useful having training, but then you might find sometimes people have forgotten things, or it just, it's not really kind of stuck in their mind. So making sure you've got that regular training, additional training for managers so that they can spot things in the workplace and they know how to deal with things. So if they see something, they know what to do. And one of the most important is actually enabling that culture of openness where employees feel that they're able to call something out. So if one employee sees another employee harassing somebody, they can say, look, that's not acceptable. You can't do that. And that is the kind of culture that's going to mean that you are able to show that you've done all those reasonable steps.
So the hoteliers then start their discussion, and I set them 5 questions. With the hospitality still struggling to find enough staff and remain a sector with incredibly high turnover rates, how can we change the perspective and culture of working in hospitality? What are the staffing challenges within their properties? What initiatives work well for staffing, retention and recruitment? How they're balancing guest experiences, expectations with operations? And how they're digitalising processes for staff, and if it is helping at all. And first up, we go to the table that was facilitated by David Ohanianian, the director of Up Hotel, who provides a summary of the key discussions he was involved with.
There was a gap in skill in management in a lot of cases where maybe people have been promoted because people had left, or, maybe retaining staff included promotion and they were straight into a job and then not necessarily had that life skill or experience being managers or looking after or mentoring staff. So it caused in some hotels tribunals to happen, but also for staff not to feel represented or heard. So one area that we thought would be a good initiative or would be very beneficial, which some hotels and other hospitality companies are taking up, is mentors or coaches to help fill that skill gap. Also more routine and structure to the managers, and for them to actually know what they need to do as a manager rather than just working in a department. Another initiative is paying correctly. It usually helps. We had experience from Stay City of them actually paying good rates and not struggling so much to recruit as opposed to other hotels. In fact, the majority of hotels in the same cities they work in underpaying and struggling. So we also talked in that subject about, well, actually paying that little bit more and saving on the overall cost. If you actually looked at the nuance and holistically, it'd probably be that you were saving money rather than all of those hidden costs, training people, taking people out of their role to supervise other people, and then people just leaving and struggling and making people overworked and unhappy. Another initiative there was 4 on 4 off from the same company. So hospitality doesn't necessarily pay the best, and it doesn't give the best in terms of work-life balance. So you're already struggling, aren't you? It's an uphill battle. So actually having that 4 on 4 off, or giving that benefit of an increased work-life balance, helped with retaining and also encouraging people to enjoy themselves and be happy in there. Another idea which was floated was given with in terms of digitalization is actually one of the F&B outlets, was it, gave an example where they could request a counsellor or someone to speak to, and they just thought there were a couple of people were using it, and then when they actually looked at it, 12 out of 40 staff actually took that up. So it was obviously very valid, and they must have felt a lot more supported there. And then lastly, we're full of conversation here, is the flexibility in hotels. If you don't need to be in, or giving an amount of flexibility for work from home, and digitizing some of these aspects would give staff a lot more, feeling of trust, and also a lot more incentive to stay within the roles that they're working in.
That's quite interesting, because I know on this table with Kat McLeod over here, there was a bit of a debate going on as to whether you should allow some flexi and remote working in hotels at a detriment to potentially having good relations with team members across and throughout the property. Now, I know there's a couple of your hoteliers had differing views there. What else was some of the key points that was raised?
So one of the things that we discussed was that often it is people who are more further advanced within their careers who have the opportunity to work from home, and also within such areas as IT, human resources, and non-front of office, non-directly customer or guest serving roles. And that this can be a challenge to balance the feelings and the team cohesiveness of your front of house team, and you can end up with an upstairs, downstairs. So how do we address that? And how do we balance that? And I think that there's a lot more conversation to have around that, because hospitality offers a huge variety of roles. And KK from Wellesley, you were talking about the opportunities of, for example, professional organisations like the Institute of Hospitality to help younger members of the organisation build that hospitality community and build their own professional careers. Because there is a concern that sometimes people arrive at work and arrive at interviews today with a list of expectations that may include flexible working, may include fewer hours than most of us worked when we started out in our hospitality careers. And in many ways, it's about educating and helping the younger generations, the millennials and Gen Z, to see that there are huge opportunities, but this is your career ladder. And once you understand that if you start at the bottom, but you can see your next level and you can see the aspirations at the top.
It's that need to give people a framework to understand what they're working towards. Exactly. And what their gains will be over a period of time. And certainly I think that, more corporate organizations have had those frameworks in place for some time, but perhaps more independent businesses have not necessarily have such a clear framework of opportunity.
We discussed the importance of keeping in mind as well as the natural human and authentic, compassionate aspect of all of this, there is a real direct commercial correlation between staff performance and staff content and the reviews that guests leave. It's much more pleasurable
to be served by happy, welcoming staff, because ultimately that authentic hospitality is at the heart of what we're all trying to deliver. And that's through purely no food and beverage check-in operations and also the food and beverage. And the engaged leadership and visible leadership has a direct positive contribution on staff retention and staff happiness.
Excellent. Okay, right. To wrap this up, I'm going to go over to Johnny Seabury from Sarova and Nurse Table. What was some of the key points here?
We talked a lot more around mental health and well-being rather than actual recruitment, although they kind of go together a little bit. We felt, I guess, the overall summary of our discussion was that we as employers, and whether senior or middle managers, have the responsibility to provide a safe and secure working environment for everybody in our business and even prospective employees in the future. Where one of the comments we made was that we're all experts in our field of what we do. And for the people in this room, that doesn't necessarily include, mental health counselling, looking after people in that respect. But we need to be aware of it. We need to have some training and understanding of how to cope with it. Notice the signs of our, people that we're responsible for, and understand that the conflictions that they may be facing. And it's not always just about work. It could be around financial issues, family worries, parents, kids, whatever, partners. Certainly in hospitality, a lot of overseas staff on our books, and they could be facing, issues of like homesickness. People from the other side of the world, maybe English isn't the first language, they're struggling, they don't know anybody here, and all these sorts of things can have a big impact on people, as well as finding the balance between efficiency and extortion, I think was one of the comments that was made. Cutting staff to save money, but then expecting staff that you keep on to work twice as hard, and that's really going to affect them. Work-life balance, things like that. So, looking around those areas, we've all talked for the last 4 years since COVID about, it's really hard to find staff and where have all the employees gone, which is what this topic is about. But, there's the other side of it as well, which is also really important.
Certainly there was obviously a lot of factors there. And as you mentioned, it's not just what they're doing at work, it's what's happening at home.
Yeah.
And obviously sometimes work is a sanctuary. So how can you make that sanctuary feel safe, secure, and enjoyable? I think that's the main thing, because some of us just want to come to work and have a good time, don't we?
Absolutely.
And escape those nightmares that might be going on at home. You've been listening to the hospitality discussion on staffing and leadership, recorded on September the 4th. Our next instalment looks at marketing and demand, so look out for that when it goes live. Remember, you can subscribe to Travel Market Life on our website, www.travelmarket.life, or follow us on LinkedIn to get the regular newsletters and updates for the most recent podcasts and articles that go live. Thanks for listening.
For more, go to Travel Market Life. The music sensation by Zach Nelson is reproduced under license from Storyblocks. Travel Market Life is a Haynes Marcoms digital marketing agency production, serving the travel and technology industries.